I think we got a letter about the apology. I will come to that. Let's welcome the BBBEE Commission, Broad-Based Black Economic Commission on transformation, regarding the transformation in the financial sector. Welcome the PBO, media, everybody. Apologies. Tebo, can you speak for yourself? I want to apologize for you. Why are we starting the meeting 30 minutes late today instead of starting at 9 o'clock?
I wish to apologize to everyone. I was not able to connect. I couldn't connect at all.
Explain what happened. Yesterday, we raised the issue that where you are not audible. And every time you get into the platform, we can't hear you properly. And then today, we are supposed to start the meeting at 9. Members can't get connected. Explain what's the problem, because Parliament has got the IT division.
I have a connectivity problem, sir, but as I'm talking to you now, I'm sitting in IT. I'm right at Parliament as we're speaking now in the IT department, and they're trying to sort out the problem.
You have a connectivity problem in Parliament?
Yes, so they don't know that they're trying to sort it out.
Even yesterday?
Because yesterday I was at home, but today, because of what happened yesterday, I came to Parliament this morning because I know what the Wi-Fi here doesn't create problems, but unfortunately it still gave me problems. So I'm sitting in the IT department now, and they were trying to connect me.
Okay, let's proceed. Do we have other apologies?
I didn't receive any apologies except the one that I gave yesterday about Nedlac not attending the meeting and the letter that they sent.
Chair, it's Alan. We've received an apology from Honorable Peters.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Let's move to the next item. Briefing by Nedlac and the Black-Based Black Economic Empowerment Commission on transformation in the financial sector, and update on the financial sector summit. Over to you. Who's briefing the committee?
Good morning, Chair. On our side, the BBBEE Commission is here. I will introduce the team. And we also have the DTIC representative as our line department. Will be guided by yourself, Chair, in terms of whether we should proceed.
Yes, the platform is yours. You can introduce the team. Then do you have the slides that you can share with us on the screen so that they make you a co-host?
All right, Chair, we are sharing the slides. Can we see the slides, Chair?
Yes, we can see the slides. Then you can proceed.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, my name is Zodwa Ntuli, the Commissioner for the BBBEE Commission. Chair, on the platform, we do have the delegation from the Commission, but we also are ably led by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, and we do have the representatives from the department. I'll introduce the team by starting with Mr. Jacob Maputa, who is the Chief Director for the BBBEE policy in the department. And we also have the officials from the Commission. We've got Ms. Muipone Khaboisile, who's our Head of Investigations and Enforcement. Then we've got Nontokozo Nokwali Mboyi, who's our Chief Operations Officer. And we also have Ms. Tembagazi Dondashe, who is our Director for Organizational Strategy and Performance. And we also have Mr. Mufihli Teleki, who is our Director for Stakeholder Relations and Communication. So these are the people that are here on the platform representing the Commission as well as the DTIC. Chair, we wish to welcome the opportunity for us to engage with the committee in regards to the financial sector transformation. We have had an opportunity, obviously, to engage with the committee previously, where we presented basically some of the issues that arose from the industry in regards to transformation, the need to have the sector accelerating the transformation initiatives within it. We do regard the financial sector as the most important sector of our economy, particularly because a number of other sectors rely on them in terms of financing for whatever operations are happening in the economy. And so we believe that if they do lead and set an example in terms of transformation, then we should be in a position to have almost everybody following in their footsteps. So we believe that they can be the leader, but also in terms of where we are as a country, there are certain sectors that clearly appear not to be moving as quickly as they should in terms of transformation. So having said that, and really appreciating this opportunity to engage with yourselves, we note that the Nedlac team is not presenting today, and as well as the team that was presenting previously from the National Treasury. So we will focus our presentation in terms of at least the work that we are mandated to do, the trends that we are picking up in the industry, and also what is it that our statistics are telling us in terms of progress around transformation in the sector. Chair, I think it is also important for us to just note that transformation in this country remains an imperative. It remains one of the issues that should be a priority. And today, and it was like that since 2003 when the BBBEE legislation was passed. So the reason for establishing the BBBEE framework in this country still exists today. And the reason we're saying that is because as a country, holistically, we have not moved to make a significant dent in how our economy is structured, in the ownership patterns, but also in terms of the real participation of Black people in the mainstream economy. So the reason for transformation, they remain today, and they are still relevant as they were when we actually attained the political power in 1994. And so our democracy has been growing, but our equality levels and the disparities that existed previously, they still exist today. And so it is important that as we reflect on the financial sector, we reflect against that particular background. Chair, in terms of just the mandate of the Commission, I think it is important also for us to start by indicating that the BBBEE legislation is one of the legislative measures that was adopted pursuant to the Constitution of South Africa. So our Constitution in Clause 9, talking to the right to equality, recognizes that apartheid basically affected the country in a sense that Black people were excluded from the mainstream economy, from participating in the mainstream economy, but also from accessing opportunities that will enable them to participate either in terms of employment, decision-making in various organizations and enterprises, but also just in terms of the skills that Black people need to participate in the economy. So the issues around the economic empowerment of Black people cuts across all of these areas around the ownership patterns, which means that Black people need to own a stake of this economy because previously they didn't. And we need to ensure that that parity is achieved at some point. But secondly, in terms of the skilling, Black people were excluded, particularly in the critical skills that are required in the economy. We've seen the scarce skill list that has been issued in the previous weeks. and which actually identified the critical skills that the economy requires. We must note that a number of Black people, because of the exclusionary practices and the exclusionary laws that existed, they were not able to access some of these skills. So the BBBEE legislation basically requires that the private sector as well as the public sector contributes directly on an annual basis towards the skilling of Black people. That relates to both the people that are employed within these entities as well as people that are not employed. It is for this reason that you'll find that a number of entities are paying for learners at universities, at TVET colleges and so forth. That is an attempt through the BBBEE legislation to have both the private sector and the public sector to contribute towards that, because government on its own will not be in a position to offer those opportunities or even the funding towards that. So now, all of these issues that have been identified in the Constitution are things that government is required to implement legislative measures as well as other programs to be able to drive towards the economic inclusivity, but as well as the equality that we need to see in the country. So in 2003, pursuant to the Constitution, the BBBEE Act was passed. And when it was passed in 2003, it was then implemented for that period up until 2011, when the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition did a review to look at how the legislation is doing and whether we are about to achieve what it was intended to achieve. And in 2013, Parliament decided that it will look at closing the gaps that were identified through the review. And those gaps related to the inconsistent application of the BBBEE legislation by the public sector and the private sector, but also it needed to close the gap in terms of misalignment that existed, where you found that the number of pieces of legislation that seem to attempt to deal with BBBEE or Black economic empowerment, but then you find that some of the measures that are implemented actually go against the framework that has been adopted for the country for BBBEE. There are other things that are good in doing in terms of advancing Black people. However, as a country, we need to be guided by a framework that can ensure consistency so that the impact can then be achieved. So the misalignment was a problem for the implementation, and Parliament saw it fit to actually close that gap. It is for that reason that in 2013, in the amendments, Parliament introduced the trumping provision that in the event that there's any other piece of legislation in the country that seems to address the issues that are being addressed in the BBBEE Act, in the event of a conflict, the BBBEE Act must trump that particular legislation. However, where there's no conflict, where the two pieces of legislation are not in conflict and they're driving the same objective, the Act then requires that we then work in a coherent manner to ensure that BBBEE is advanced. So, Chair, the BBBEE Act, as amended, also sought to deal with the issue of fronting. So since 2003, when the legislation was passed, we saw a number of activities taking place, particularly in the area of procurement. We saw a whole lot of joint ventures that were entered into. We saw a whole lot of new Black owned enterprises that were created to be able to access opportunities, especially in the public sector in terms of tenders, in terms of contracts in general, but also in terms of some of the public-private partnerships that were necessary in the economy. So we saw a lot of activities that would not have happened if the legislation was not enacted. And so we must accept that there were gains that were achieved, which today, if the BBBEE legislation was not enacted, would not have been achieved at all. However, what happened during that period from 2003 up until when the review was done, and which is continuing again, post the amendments, is the sketch of fronting that took place. So a number of initiatives were implemented, but some of those initiatives actually had just fronting tendencies. in a sense that most of the deals that have been entered into do not ultimately result in value in the hands of Black people. Also, some of the enterprise and supply development initiatives that were recorded and recognized by the various entities on their scorecards, they did not necessarily translate into the real development of Black entrepreneurs. It is for this reason that we are not seeing Black conglomerates that have been created over the period. It's for this reason also that we see that as much as we want to invest and grow our SME sector, we are not seeing the expansion of the SME sector. In fact, what we are seeing is that those players that have been playing in that sector, some of them are exiting because they are not able to sustain themselves. And that is also purely because some of the market structure challenges like collusion, cartels, monopolies, those still exist, and they make it difficult for the Black entrepreneurs that wish to participate and compete fairly in the economy. They get to be excluded, not because they are not able to perform in themselves, not because they're not skilled enough, but because the market structure still has the restrictions and the constraints that existed. We still have high barriers of to entry in some of the markets. This has been like that before 1994, and some of these structures still exist today, which therefore means that as we look at the interventions that are being brought by the BBBEE legislation, we must accept that they actually happen within a market structure that still has challenges, which means that it is important for us as government to look at all those other programs that are aimed at eradicating some of those constraints that existed historically and that continue to actually plague our SMMEs, especially the Black entrepreneurs that are supposed to come into the economy. But also the fourth thing that the amendments dealt with was the issue around the proper regulation of the verification industry. As you are aware, the verification process in terms of how the entities are doing around BBBEE for them to attain the BBBEE certificates that are issued to them that are giving them the levels, that process is done and run by the private sector through the verification agencies that are accredited by SANAS, which is a body that the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition appointed to be able to regulate that part, to ensure that the people that are conducting verification and issuing BBBEE certificates are people that are properly regulated, that will follow the methodology that has been adopted and issued by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. But over the period from 2003 to the time of the review, what was picked up is that there were significant gaps in a sense that the credibility of the verification process was not at the level where it should. There were a lot of certificates that seemingly were being issued just purely on the basis of a phone call or arrangements, and that it was not necessarily a correct or true reflection of how the entities were performing under other circumstances. So this gap had to be closed by introducing some framework to properly regulate those. And the last thing, Chair, that is important about those amendments is that because of the fact that there was no regulatory body for BBBEE in the country, although there was a BBBEE legislation, a whole lot of these practices around fronting occurred because of the fact that there was lack of monitoring. And Parliament saw it fit then to create a regulatory body that will look into ensuring that the BBBEE legislation is implemented in the way that it was intended, but also to identify instances of fronting, misrepresentation, which then the Commission as a regulatory body will have to deal with and also bring attention of those practices to the public and also refer those for prosecution so that then we can have consequences for some of these practices that undermine the BBBEE legislation. Chair, now having made those amendments, it's that reason that the Commission now exists. So the BBBEE Commission was established in terms of Section 13B of the BBBEE Act, and our functions are outlined in Section 13F. These functions, Chair, are a mirror of the main issues that were identified as challenges in the amendment process. And so the functions that are identified here are aimed at dealing with the issues that were identified there. Chair, we are mandated to oversee, supervise, and promote adherence to the BBBEE Act in the public interest. So what we do on an ongoing basis, we monitor the market on our own, and we also then intervene in instances where we pick up instances that are non-adherence. Under here, we normally would intervene by sending entities letters indicating the problems that we're observing, and we'll give them an opportunity to correct that, and we will also offer to assist them to correct that. So this is more a compliance-driven area where we seek to ensure that we proactively assist the market to be able to adhere to the legislation. Also in this area, Chair, it is where we also have the public and also entities reporting some of the certificates that are fraudulent, that are false, that are presented during procurement processes, as well as some that are presented for other authorizations like licenses and so forth. So those certificates will be sent to the Commission, and the Commission will then be able to determine whether they are valid or not, and where they are not valid, the Commission will then declare them as invalid and instruct their withdrawal. We have been receiving cooperation around the withdrawal of the certificates. In the beginning, there were a huge number of certificates that were reported that were not valid, but we are seeing a decrease in that. And we do believe that this is because also of the initiatives from the entities themselves, both in the private and the public sector, in now really being careful about the certificates that they receive. They do interrogate them as opposed to before, when people just used to receive a paper, even a certificate that is glaringly invalid. Some entities would accept it. So for instance, Chair, there were entities, for instance, in some of the cases that we investigated, where, for instance, in the ESCOM case that we investigated, what we found is that the entity at the time submitted a BBBEE certificate that was obviously false, in a sense that the certificate was classifying Tegeta as an entity with 5 million in turnover, when the financial statements of that entity clearly indicate a turnover that is far much higher than that. But also ESCOM in itself, accepting a certificate that says Tegeta is only 5 million in turnover, was obviously negligent, in a sense that ESCOM itself had paid millions, you know, to Tegeta in under the contract. So there's no way that it could actually have been a 5 million turnover company. So through this particular process, we are able to then identify some of those obviously invalid certificates, fraudulent certificates. There were also verification agencies that were issuing certificates to various entities which did not have authority to issue certificates. So it's important for us to also ensure that when we look at certificates, we can firstly assure ourselves that the certificate was issued by an accredited verifier, but also that that verifier is still registered with SANAS. SANAS has got a list of all of the verification agencies that are authorized to issue certificates. Chair, in terms of the second mandate, we are required to strengthen and foster collaboration between the private and the public sector to safeguard the objectives of the Act. Through this, Chair, we have engaged extensively with the public sector as well as the private sector, basically engaging on their obligations and giving them an opportunity to also contact the Commission so that we can assist them where they are battling. And this collaboration has also assisted us also in identifying some of the strategic partners that can enhance our mandate, and so that we can actually improve compliance. So we do engage with the various public entity and regulatory bodies to also to enhance our mandate. We have MOUs with the entities that that would assist our mandate, like the Commission for Employment Equity, the Competition Commission, the CIPC, as well as some of the entities that we, at the moment, we've got about 10 MOUs, and we do ensure that these MOUs do not necessarily become documents that will gather dust. So we've got specific activities that are identified, which we pursue with these various bodies, but also important is the information sharing arrangement, especially that is useful for our investigations and so forth. In terms of our mandate, as I indicated, the commission was introduced also to be able to deal with the fronting sketch. And in this case, the commission has been empowered to investigate in response to complaints, but also to identify instances where it can on its own initiate investigations. So we have so far initiated a number of investigations proactively. So if we look at our period from 2016 to the financial year that ended 2021 March, we had received about 909 complaints. Those include both the ones from the public and the ones that are initiated by ourselves. The ones that are initiated ourselves often would come from a tip-off where the complainant does not want their identity to be revealed, but also it will also be in terms of some of the articles that we identify from the media, where we pick up that there are issues here of non-compliance, and where the commission believes that there's justification to initiate an investigation, we have done so. So there are a number of investigations where we have published, where the commission itself initiated those. This particular function is critical, and it is the one that is actually taking up a lot of our resources. And we're hoping that in due course, we'll begin to see the prosecution of the matters that have been referred for prosecution in the NPA, as well as some of the matters that have been referred for further criminal investigation in the SAPS. Chair, we also have a mandate to promote advocacy and access to opportunities. And in this case, we also have educational programs that we're running. We also have the provincial rollouts that we do to try and reach the rural communities, as well as some of the underdeveloped areas, Chair. We would not be able to touch on this particular aspect in this presentation, but we're just giving you a sense of what our mandate entails. And today's presentation will then zoom specifically into the issues that relate to the financial sector. Chair, we also have a mandate to register all major BE transactions. These are transactions that are at 25 million and above in terms of the transaction value. So which means that any transaction, Chair, that will take place, which is an ownership transaction, where is a transaction where Black people are acquiring a stake in any entity, or where Black people are actually selling or acquiring assets or a business or a part of the business in an existing entity. Those transactions, if the value is at 25 million and above, they must be registered with the commission within 15 days of being concluded. So we have started receiving these transactions from 2017, when the minister announced and gazetted the threshold of 25 million. Before then, there were no submission of these transactions because the threshold wasn't there. So we have been receiving these transactions, and in the presentation, we will then show you the transactions that related to the private, to the financial sector, and how the financial sector has been doing and performing in that area. But Chair, it is important to also indicate when we speak about the major BE transactions that we are actually comforted that even despite the impact of COVID in the past 2 years, we still see that there are ownership transactions that are taking place, which gives us an indication that there's still the willingness to actually continue to comply with the BBBEE Act as an imperative in this country. We also, Chair, on an annual basis are mandated to receive what we call the annual compliance reports. The legislation requires that all organs of state, the CETAs, as well as the public entities, must report on an annual basis in terms of their performance towards BBBEE, as well as all the JSE listed companies. So they must submit their annual reports to the commission, for the commission to assess the performance, but also to be able to consolidate the data, and so that we can then produce the reports that can, on an ongoing basis, give the country a sense of how we are doing, so that where there's a need for intervention from a policy point of view, those interventions can actually happen. But also where there are interventions that are needed from an enforcement point of view, those interventions can happen. Chair, we also have the responsibility to promote governance and accountability. This was also included by Parliament on the basis that in a number of initiatives that related to BBBEE, there seems to be a lack of governance, in a sense that the principles of governance were basically out of the window. And this is the reason why a number of BBBEE transactions were characterized by corruption tendencies, and which basically tainted BBBEE transactions as if BBBEE in itself is corruption, when actually corrupt people use a legitimate policy and process to actually do what is unaccepted and which is criminal. And these are the things that actually give us comfort when we see that corruption has been elevated to be a priority in this country, and government is working hard to deal with that. So the governance issues emanating from BBBEE transactions have also resulted in the reason why BBBEE has not been successful, because what we've seen is that Black people would be made directors, they would be made shareholders, but there wouldn't be any participation. And those issues would happen because the board meetings will not happen. There would not be even sharing of documents that are required for all the shareholders to have. Particularly Black shareholders will be denied access to information around the entity in which they are supposed to be shareholders. So these things necessitated that as part of our mandate, as we look at all of these initiatives, also we identify some of the gaps that on governance, and where necessary, we refer those to the relevant authorities to deal with. Chair, we then want to also highlight some of the processes that are mandated in terms of the regulations. And these are processes that are in the regulations that are issued by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. And in terms of the complaints processes, we receive complaints in a prescribed manner, and we have up to 12 months to investigate a complaint. Some of the complaints we're able to finalize in a very short period of time, but most of our complaints, especially the ones that are complex, we are not able to do within a period of 12 months. In that way, we are allowed to extend the period and notify the complainants in that regard. So we are seeing an increase in the complaints, but what is important also to record here is that the quality of complaints are also increasing. In the slides that follow, Chair, will just indicate to you the complaints that we are receiving from the financial sector, and so that we can also see the type of complaints and the issues that are raised in those ones. So we also provide a free service of advisory opinions to all of the entities in the financial sector and any other sector. We issue this for free to entities big and small. This is aimed at ensuring that we are able to prevent some of the non-compliance and fronting practices upfront, as opposed to dealing with them later when they've been implemented. Also, in terms of the registration of major BEE transactions, I indicated that we are required to register this. We've got a list of these transactions on our website. So whoever is interested in seeing who are the Black people that are acquiring stakes in various entities, those transactions are listed on our website, and further details of those transactions obviously are not on the website, but you'll be able to see the parties in those transactions and be able to then request further information in respect of any transaction that you may be interested in. Chair, this is intended also at bringing the transparency around who are the people participating in these ownership deals, because people have always argued that BBBEE is only for a few connected people. But if you look at the transactions that have already been reported and registered, you'll see that there's an expansion of the people that are participating. But what we noted in the 2019 report around the major BEE transaction was that the new entrants were being reduced, in a sense that we continue to see the same players that are involved in these particular transactions. You'll see also when you look at the list on our website, you'll see that there are entities that are prevalent, that are the ones that are BEE partners in various transactions. So which basically indicates that there might be a challenge around new entrants, and which may be a challenge that arises from a lack of funds, or even from, the lack of knowledge around some of these opportunities that exist in the economy. Chair, I've indicated also in terms of the compliance reports, the annual compliance reports, both for Measure B transactions and compliance reports, the Commission is required to assess the submitted reports and transactions for compliance. And where we've got concerns about the particular transaction or report, we are required to give feedback to the entity within 90 days. And we have been doing that. Chair, the last part is the written clarification. This is a process that we introduced ourselves as the Commission, in addition to the processes that the Minister has prescribed. This is enabling us to give a much more quicker response to the public and the entities in terms of the application of the Act. So we've got a turnaround time of 5 days, and we are able to, on average, respond to our stakeholders within three days. So, Chair, we believe that all of this is aimed at assisting the sectors and the entities that are operating in these sectors to be able to comply with the BBBEE Act. Chair, we just want to also outline that in respect of the financial sector, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition has gazetted a financial sector code, which was gazetted on the 1st of December 2017. This means that all of the entities that are operating within the financial sector are required to measure themselves in accordance to this. So in terms of the BBBEE Act, we've got what we call the generic codes, which are issued by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, which then measure 5 key elements, which is ownership, management control, skills development, enterprise and supply development, as well as the socio-economic development. In regards to the financial sector code, the sector code takes into account some of the issues that are unique to the sector, and therefore you will see that in the sector code there's 2 additional elements that are being measured, which is the empowerment financing as well as access to finance. The 2 were introduced by the sector itself in trying to drive, firstly, the empowerment finance, to make available finance that is aimed at ensuring that Black people are able to participate in the acquisitions, but also to ensure that they're able to receive funding that will assist them to be able to acquire stake, but also to run their own businesses that they've created. In regards to access to finance, the intention was to ensure that because of the fact that the financial sector is critical not only to entities but also to access to credit for the ordinary citizens, that the issue around financial literacy become very critical in what they're doing, but also ensuring that the consumers within the sector, and that include the consumers that are business in nature, that they are protected against any unscrupulous practices that may take place during the transactions. So they've added all of these important elements for the sector so that they can also measure themselves on that. So we also have looked at how the private sector has been doing in terms of the obligations under the Act. But before I deal with the Chair, I just want to indicate that, again, within the context of South Africa, where 92% of the population is Black, and also if you look at the economically active population in South Africa, 91% is comprised of Black people. However, when you look at where we are as a country, even since the adoption of the BBBEE Act, only 31% overall Black ownership is recorded. So Black people only own 31% of the economy in this country. And also, if you look at the ownership by Black women, we've got only 15% recorded that can be attributed to Black women. This has seen a slight increase though, because when we measured in 2017, it was at 9%. So we hope that the increase is an indication of the opportunities that are being given to Black women to be able to participate in the economy. And we hope also that that will also come with the voting rights and the economic benefits that should flow from that. Because what we also identified is that increasingly, the voting rights for Black people do get to be stripped by shareholders agreements, as well as some of the dividend policies that are adopted by entities from time to time, which will actually make sure that the Black people do not get the dividends that are flowing from the entities where they hold the stakes. Chair, also that's in terms of management control. Overall, when we look at the JSE listed companies, Black people are only represented at 28%, which means that the boards and the decision-making structures of the JSE listed entities are still occupied and dominated by white people in South Africa. So there's a need to move that. But what we also were comforted by was the results that indicate to us that in the public sector, the public sector is at around 66% in terms of Black representation on the decision-making structures, including the boards. So we're hoping that the private sector can also move more towards achieving high levels of representation that will reflect the demographics of this country. In making reference to the JSE listed companies, Chair, the presentation will show you in terms of just the financial sector, how it looks like in terms of management control vis-a-vis the ownership credentials that they have. Chair, we also want to indicate that in terms of the reporting requirements, the financial sector entities are required to report on an annual basis to the Commission in respect of those entities that are listed on the JSE But also, the entities are required to report to their Financial Sector Council, which is a council that is established in terms of the sector code that is intended to make sure that it monitors and it encourages compliance with the sector code by the entities. And they are required to report to the council on an annual basis. And I think what is important for us to record is that in regards to the sector, in general, we've recorded a significant decline of the reports in 2020. This may also be due to the impact on the activities of the entities due to COVID-19, but also the restrictions that were imposed that affected some of the operations within the entities. But with the Financial Sector Council, Chair, the Financial Sector Council as a council itself is required to report to the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition on an annual basis in terms of how the sector is doing. The council has not been able to submit its reports for 2018, 2019, 2020, as well as 2020-21 and to 2021. So we are advised that they have requested the minister for indulgence for them to submit all of these reports in this financial year. So hopefully the report will give us also a sense of how the sector is doing. Without this data, it becomes extremely difficult for us to give you an accurate reflection of how the transformation is happening in this. The council previously, Chair, when we were engaging with them and also when they presented to Parliament, they did raise the challenges around the entities in the financial sector not really being willing to report. And so because the entities are not reporting to the council, that affects the council in terms of compiling a report that should be submitted to the minister. So, and the minister, once the report is submitted to his office, then they are also required to submit it to the commission within 30 days for the commission to include that in this analysis of the national state of transformation in the country. Chair, the subsectors that are included in the financial sector code, they include the banks and life offices, the short-term insurers, and other institutions. And in other institutions, that's where you also find asset managers. And then it also includes the stock exchanges and the retirement and umbrella funds. So these are the subsectors that will be included. So the financial sector, when it measures itself, it will measure its progress in respect of those subsectors, how it is doing individually. Chair, in respect of our national status report, as I've indicated, we do receive those annual reports from the JSE listed companies and the organs of state. And this process then allows us to compile the report that will then be issued publicly so that government, but also the public can be able to monitor and track progress. In addition to the annual report, what we have created is this, the BBBEE certificate portal, where we require all of the verification agencies to upload the certificates that they issue to any entity. That population of certificate certificates allow us on an annual basis to be able to also include those statistics into the annual status report. So our annual status report is based on that information, the data that we collect through the portal, as well as the annual compliance reports that are submitted. So based on our statistics for 2020, you will see that within the financial sector, 64% of the entities are rated at level 1 to 4, which is a high number. So hopefully, this is an indication of the real transformation that is happening within the entities that have achieved these levels. And also what we want to also note here is that the level of rating that is awarded to an entity should also demonstrate the reflection on the ownership structure, but also at the management. The faces behind the control of the entity in terms of management must also reflect that the company is empowered. We also have other figures, Chair, that the presentation will touch on, and I will be handing over to Ms. Thembakazi Dondashi to take us through the various aspects that are relating specifically to the financial sector. Chair, I must also indicate that although we do not cover all of the sub-sectors in their individual nature, we do not collect that information in that manner, but hopefully as we increase the data that is required to be submitted to the Commission, we can be able to expand that. But the report from the Council also assists us to measure the trends according to the subsectors. And we're hoping that once those reports are submitted, also we can be able to consolidate. Chair, I will hand over to Ms. Dondashi to take the committee through the rest of the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. As introduced by the Commissioner, Thembakazi Dondashi, I'll be sharing with you the data that we have analyzed in the past 4 years in terms of analyzing the data for the financial sector. We will only focus on giving you the stats that relate to financial sector. As you can see on the, we have 2 sets of data that we collect and analyze in the BBBEE Commission. The Commissioner has indicated earlier that we received compliance reports in line with Section 13G, which were received from the state companies and organs of state, SITAs. That is the information, that is the reports that were received and analyzed. And also we have a BBBEE certificate portal system that we have, whereby verification agencies capture the BBBEE certificate as they issue to the entities. So that these are the 2 sets of data that we analyze. So our analysis is limited on those 2 data information. If you look at 2020, we see that the certificate that were captured from the financial sector were 32. Then in terms of reporting in line with Section 13G, only 18 entities have reported. So noting that in terms of a portal system that of the certificate that were reported, we saw a decline of 85%. And also in terms of the Section 13G, we saw a decline of 33%. Then moving to the next slide. In this one, we are trying to give you a trends in terms of BBBEE rating that entities that are reporting are getting in terms of BBBEE. Looking at the portal system, in 2020, the certificate that were submitted or captured by verification agencies indicate that 64% of entities were rating between level 1 and level 4. Then 36% of those submitted captured certificate are rated from level 5 to non-compliance. But when we move towards the Section 13G of the reported entities, 56% of the reported entities were rating BBBEE level 1 to 4. And then when we, sorry, that is the typo, 44% of the other entities were rated level 5 to non-compliance. if you look at the number of level of rating, we have increased when you compare to the previous financial year. Then we go further, then try to break down in terms of Black ownership and then versus Black women ownership. If looking at BEE portal, we see that in 2020, there is a slight decline compared to 2019. In terms of BEE portal, in the Black ownership average that reported shows that 23.4% of the entities that reported will have a Black ownership. Then under Section 13G, it's only 15.1%. If you look comparing in 2017 and 2020, there is a large decline in terms of Black ownership in the financial sector, because in 2017, we had 42.8%. Then in 2018, in terms of Section 33, we had 19.1% in terms of Black ownership. There is a decline, and the decline has been continuing since 2018, 2019, when we compare to 2017. Then when we are looking at Black women ownership, also the same. When we compare to 2017 and then the BEE information that was captured in 2017 and 2019, there is a decline in terms of Black women ownership. It was 17.1 in 2017. Then when we look in 2020, we have only 11% in terms of Black ownership, though there is an increase when we compare to 2019, about 0.9% increase. 1.1 increase. And then in terms of Section 13G, we saw a decline when we compare in 2019 and 2020. Then going further, we looking at the breakdown in terms of threshold of the entities that have reported in terms of Black ownership. In the threshold whereby entities are reporting of Black ownership between a range of 0% to 10% and up to 100%. We see in 2020 that those reported mostly have a Black ownership ranging from 10 to 0%, because the highest number of the reported entities under portal is 32.1. Then when we look at entities that have 100% Black ownership, it's only 7%. Then moving to JS listed entities, we also noted that in 2020, the highest number also falls under a range of around range of 25% to 51%, which is an improvement when we're comparing to 2019. So most entities are reporting that they have a 25 to 51 Black ownership in terms of a breakdown. Then move to the second slide, Commissioner. Also, in terms of Black women ownership, we note the same trend in terms of Black ownership. In 2020, the highest entities that reported, they are reporting 57.1% that they have Black women ownership, or when we're looking at the portal site, which was a trend that we saw from 2018, 2019, that most entities are reporting around that Black ownership, Black women ownership is on between 0.1, 0% to 10%. Then when we look at the Section 13G, which is the listed companies, 50% of the entities that reported indicated that their Black women ownership falls within the threshold of 0 to 10% and also 10 to 30%. So under 100%, there's no entity that reported any Black women ownership entity under Section 13G, which is the listed companies, which is a decline in terms of when we compare to 2019. At least 2019, the entities that reported, 7.4% of them had Black entities that were Black women owned 100%. Then when we move to next slide, Commissioner, to the achievement of BEE levels, we noted that there is an increase in terms of when we convert the points in terms of percentages, in terms of comparing when we compare to 2019. Management control, we noted that entities that reported on average, they have achieved in terms of points in percentage form, 60.1%, which was an increase comparing to 2019. And also skills development, there was also an increase there. Then there was also an increase under enterprise and supplier development, also on the socio-economic development. But when we looked at the JSE listed companies, also there was a slight increase in terms of the meeting the targets in terms of the elements. The only decline that we noted there was under the supplier, enterprise and supplier development, which is it's not that much decline, as you can see that in 2018 it was 48.9. Now and in 2020 we have 46.8%. And looking at the achievement of priority elements, as you know that we have 3 priority elements, which is management control, skills development, and enterprise and supplier development. We saw the regress in that part, because in 2019 it was 56. In 2018 we had 60% of reported reporting entities achieving a priority element. Then in 2020 there was we were sitting at 43% of those entities that reported that have achieved the priority element, which means that we need financial sector needs to take note of that, to ensure that we do meet the priority element as per the BBBEE codes. Looking at year-on-year movement, we saw when we compare in 2019 and 2020 under overall Black ownership, when we are looking at overall Black ownership, we are considering both portal information as well as the Section 13G reporting. We noted a decline in that. In 2019, we had 24.7% of Black ownership under the large entities. Also, then in 2020, there was that decline, which indicated that the financial sector falls at 23.4%. Then overall, Black women ownership under large entities, there was an increase because it moved from 10.1% to 11%. Then overall Black ownership at the QSE level, that is entities who have a threshold, a turnover between 10 million and to 50 million. We also saw an increase there, because in 2019, entities Black ownership was sitting at 14.4%. Then in 2020, it moved to 25%. Black women ownership also there was an increase. In 2019, we were the QSE was sitting at 4.1%. In 2020, it moved to 8.4%. Then in terms of the number of certificates that were uploaded in 2020, we see a very decline when we compare in 2019. For example, under QSE, we only received 4 certificates, which is in 2020. In 2019, there were 24. Then under large entities, we had 185 entities uploaded in 2019. Then in 2020, only 28 certificates were uploaded under financial sector. Then the next slide will just indicating the number of BE transactions that are submitted on a yearly basis to the BE Commission. And then in 2017, 2018, we had 272 transactions that we received. Out of those transactions, we only registered 183. Then we rejected 89. when we reject transactions, it's when the parties, when they are filing their major transactions, don't meet the requirements as per the standards that are required when they are filing. Then in 2019, we have 95. Then in 2019-2020 financial year, we had 108, 109 transactions that we received, and then we registered 80, 26 of them were rejected. Then in 2020-2021, we received 52 transactions. Then of the 52 transactions, 44 were registered, and then 8 were rejected. The next slide will just show the funding type that the transactions that were funded indicate that, the major, out of the transactions that we received in 2017, 2018, 63 of them were from the financial sector. Then 2018, 2019, 21 of them were from also financial sector. This indicates that financial sector is the highest when we compare to other entities that have transactions that are registered with the BEE Commission following the generic sector. So, so far, transactions under the financial sector, we see that they are being registered, and it's the highest entity. A highest sector that is registering transactions. Then when we move to underfunding, on the number of transactions that were received in 2017 and 2018 financial year, in 2018, 2019, the reason that we have the 2 financial years is that we didn't have a report for the following way, 2019 and 2020 financial year. We are still in the process of analyzing those transactions that we received, and the report will be available. When available, the BEE Commission will announce that, and it will be available in our website. So currently, we are looking at 2017, 2018, and 2018-2019 financial year in terms of numbers of transactions that were funded by bank loans. In 2017, 2018, we have 52 transactions that were funded through bank loans. Then in 2018, 2019, only 15 of those transactions that we received were financed through bank loans. Then on the next table, it shows the amount of funding that was received from the financial sector. Looking at the total amount that was funded through the transaction in 2017-2018 financial year, we see that through bank loans, 37 billion of the transaction were funded through financial sector, which means only 19.6% of the funded, which financial sector only contributed 19.6% of the total transaction the transaction amount that was registered that year. Then in 2018-2019, we see that 3.9 billion was received from the financial sector, which accounts for only 4% of the amount. Then the other 2 types below the banks, the bank loans, we see a mixed funding, which is bank loan plus vendor financing, and also cash and bank loans. So in that, it's a mix. So we didn't count as 100% financed by financial sector. Then I will stop there. Then I give the commissioner to go further in terms of the number of complaints that we have received, in terms of the complaints that we received from the entities that were lodged to the BEE Commission, and also then we will focus mostly on the financial sector in terms of the total complaints that we have received, to indicate how many complaints that we received from the financial sector. Then you will do the conclusion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Thembakazi, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. Chair, we have presented basically the statistics that gives us an indication in terms of the elements that are being measured. And as we've indicated, the financial sector plays a critical role. Thembakazi has alluded to the fact that in regards to major BEE transactions, those are ownership transactions. The financial sector has contributed at least up to 19% of the funds that were made available. But we do believe that there's room for them to expand that because of the empowering finance element that they have. We believe that they've got an opportunity to expand that. In the number of BEE transactions that were registered with us, where we have seen a bank loan having been extended in regard to a particular transaction, what we are not picking up is that that bank loan is an empowering finance loan. What we pick up is the normal funding that is not having any preferential rate or anything of that sort. So we have not picked up in the transactions that we've already assessed, we have not picked up a prevalence of the empowering finance that the sector has an opportunity to contribute to. The transactions are funded in the normal terms that the banks will be giving, and we think that there is an opportunity for them to increase that. But Chair, the other thing that I think is important to highlight in the presentation that Thembakazi has done is that in terms of enterprise and supply development, as well as skills development, the indications are that the entities that, for instance, are on the JSE, they are not spending even 50% of what they ought to spend towards developing Black entrepreneurs, as well as to skilling Black people in the industry. So what it means is that because the entities in terms of enterprise and supply development, they are required on an annual basis to spend 3% of the net profit after tax in funding or supporting Black enterprises in terms of the new entrants, as well as those that are already on their supply chain, so that they can expand and be able to participate meaningfully in the economy. But also in terms of skills development, they are required to spend on an annual basis 6% of the payroll in terms of training, funding bursaries. 3% of that must go to bursaries, and then the rest can then go to their skills, their staff, as well as the learnerships that they are providing to various entities. So what we are picking up is that they're not spending 50%, they're not even spending 50% on that. So which means that there is an opportunity for that money to be available to empower more and more people, especially in the financial sector where the value chains are so entrenched, and also where the barriers to entry are high, because the sector is also very capital intensive, and so the barriers to entry are very high. So it is important that the sector itself does contribute directly to the empowerment and enabling the new entrants to actually enter, but as well as to sustain themselves in there. Chair, you'll recall that during the COVID pandemic, in the beginning of the pandemic, when we looked at the impact of the pandemic, a number of small enterprises were exiting because they could not be sustained because of the restrictions and also because of the impact of the pandemic. But what also was reported was that with the relief fund that was announced by government, the Black entrepreneurs did not benefit from that. In fact, what happened is that about 75% of the funds went to the already advantaged enterprises, with Black entrepreneurs still not being able to access the funding that was made available by government as a relief fund. And the reason that was given regarding why the Black entrepreneurs have not been able to access the fund was the restrictions that were placed in terms of the application requirements, where Black entrepreneurs were not able to meet those. So it is important that as we look at economic transformation, that the funding that is made available is also less restrictive, to take into account the challenges that have always been faced by Black entrepreneurs, where they are often measured in the same way as the entities that have had an advantage. So the ability of funding within the sector is what is going to actually help us have a breakthrough. But for as long as the funding has got a lot of restrictions that encumber the Black entrepreneurs, will not see the Black-owned entities within the financial sector. You will have noted that on the JSE, the 100% Black ownership in respect to the financial sector is 0%, which means that on the JSE listed companies, we did not pick up an entity that is 100% Black owned. So we're still far from achieving what we want to achieve as a country. So the last thing that I just want to also indicate based on the presentation that Thembakazi gave is also that because the financial sector is not meeting its targets, there is no law in the BBBEE Act that will force them to meet the targets. However, what the BBBEE Act is saying is that the entities that are meeting their targets, that are reaching the levels of transformation that are high, especially between level 1 and 4, they obviously should then
recording in progress.
They should be in the position to receive preference when they are approaching government for procurement, for licenses, for public-private partnerships, and also where the state is selling assets of the states. They should be in a position to receive preference in terms of that because of the level of transformation that they have. So the push and the incentive for the financial sector to transform will rely heavily on how government disincentivize those ones that are not transformed. So we hope that in terms of how government engages and interacts with these entities, that they apply the BBBEE legislation appropriately and ensure that the entities are compliant and that they actually drive more towards achieving the targets. And Chair, there was an indication around the pre-qualification where when the High Court made a decision against the Minister of Finance around the PPPFA 51% pre-qualification in terms of Black ownership, it was suggested that the government can no longer impose a pre-qualification. That's not true, that's not correct. It was in relation to the PPPFA regulations. The court basically indicated that the Minister of Finance did not have the authority to set a pre-qualification in the regulations because it was not authorized in the main legislation to do so. However, we are aware that the Minister of Finance was appealing that decision. But I think from a BBBEE Act perspective, we need to emphasize that the organs of state and the public sector entities can and they are allowed to set a higher requirement. They can set a 51% Black ownership requirement if they want to do that based on the sector that they are overseeing and the need for the transformation in that sector. They are allowed to do that. The BBBEE Act allows them to do that by seeking permission to exceed from the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition in terms of Section 9(6) of the BBBEE Act. But also in terms of Section 10(2), they are also allowed to approach the minister to deviate from some of the targets that have been set and also to be exempted maybe in some instances from applying a certain part of the codes that have been adopted. So the flexibility continues to exist, and the misconception and the confusion that is created at times does impact the ability with which we can actually drive transformation as government. Chair, the last part of our presentation really just relates to the trends in the complaints that we have received. We are actually glad to report that we are not receiving a whole lot of complaints from the financial sector. Hopefully it's because there aren't fronting practices that are prevalent. And that if those start happening, obviously we'll see with the number of complaints that are increasing. So over the period, in terms of the complaints that we've already received, we've only recorded about 26 cases that relate to the financial sector. And what we have noted is that about 60% of those cases alleged fronting in regards to ownership. And then we've got about 2 that were in relation to misrepresentation, as well as the the fronting in regards to management control. So fronting can take place in the ownership structure, but it can also take place where people are appointed on the board structures or in management or executive positions, but they are appointed as tokens without any authority to make any decisions. So we've seen that the trend in terms of the type of complaints, fronting still is dominant in regards to the complaints that were received from the financial sector, but also we've received about 19% of the complaints relating to fraudulent BEE certificates that have been submitted. And so those ones have been dealt with as well. And we also noted that there are some instances where in the private, in the financial sector, there are instances where there are schemes, the broad-based schemes, where the beneficiaries or the participants have lodged complaints that they are not particularly involved in the participation, also in the economic benefits. And those investigations are ongoing, and the commission will announce its findings once those are concluded. Some of the complaints were looked at. They did not have merit to investigate. Some of them have been closed as such. So we want to then conclude our presentation by indicating that the financial sector is again critical. I think it is important for us to note that there is a trend in the financial sector where a few firms account for the majority of the market share. So if you look at the banking sector, the top 5 entities account for over 80% of the market share. But also if you go down to the asset management, the private equity funds, you'll see that also in that about 5 top funds or fund managers are accounting for over 70% of the market, meaning that the remaining is left for the other players to try and penetrate and be able to share the remaining. So that kind of structure obviously would require the competition authorities to look at it on an ongoing basis. But I think government on its side needs to look at some of the barriers that exist. Why is it that we're not having 100% Black-owned banks? Why are we not having 100% Black-owned financial institutions, whether in the insurance sector or so forth? And those ones that are there, the indications that we are seeing is that some of them are not sustainable, as we are seeing some acquisitions relating to some of the 100% Black-owned entities that existed before. So I would like to close our presentation at that and allow the committee to then pose questions to us, Chair. We'll do our best to respond to all of your questions, and we hope that we've addressed the other matters or the critical matters that the committee expected us to achieve. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ntuli and your team for the presentation on the financial sector transformation. Let's move to item 3, questions for clarity, comments. Over to you, members. Honorable Abraham.
Chair, thank you. Thank you so much, Chair. Once again, let me just add my voice to your appreciation of the presentations by both Ms. Ntuli and Ms. Dondashe. I have listened with interest first to the presentation of Ms. Ntuli, and I have maybe 2 or 3 questions for her. The first one is whether there are consequences for wrongdoing by the companies. The case in point is Eskom accepting the minimal turnover by Tegeta while a discovery is made that in fact the company has more. The second one is around the receipt of compliance reports, whether when they are not received by from the companies by the commission, there is consequence management in that regard, or what is the consequence in terms of the law. Lastly, the presentation states that, maybe lastly for the part that was presented by Ms. Nduli, the presentation indicates that there have been about 909 complaints received since 2016 up to 2021. And my question is what the estimated success rate is in terms of resolving them, understanding that others have to go the route of other institutions like SARS and so on. But at a general level, what can you say is the success rate in terms of the success? Chair, coming to part of what maybe they also overlap how they made their presentations, but I hear from the presentation by Ms. Ndondashe that there's been some decrease in the BE rating where Black ownership, specifically Black women ownership, is concerned. And if I can maybe just check why is that? Have they picked up the reason why, and what then should be the remedial measure? There's a concept of Black ownership, but on the other hand, you have fronting. How do you measure when there is the genuine Black ownership or genuine Black women ownership, and when there is fronting? How are you able to make out the difference and deal with it? I'll stop there for now, Chair. Maybe just the very last question I had, just toying with the idea in my mind as to whether the commission does have a feeling that the Act does not cover them. The Act has limitations in terms of what they can do. Whether the commission sometimes has a view that for them to be able to operate to the maximum, the Act could be amended. Just for interest's sake. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Abraham. Any other input or question from members? Let me ask one or two questions in the meantime. Just to check, there is supposed to be a Black Industrialist program driven by DTI. Is there progress in that regard, as much as we are not a standing committee or portfolio committee on DTI? But I know there is such an important program to bring Black people into the mainstream of the industrial sector. Two, you said that the financial sector hasn't been reporting, the Financial Sector Council not reporting from 2018. So it's business as usual the minister or anybody who has got authority over the council is not doing anything about this. Because as this committee, we are very, very interested on the financial sector. We can't have a financial sector that remains untransformed after 28 years with so many blacks as the clients of those banks, those insurance companies, and a whole range of other businesses under the financial sector. And I'm worried. It looks like Treasury is not here, whereas it's supposed to be here. Treasury is one department which was supposed to be central, working with yourselves to see to it that the transformation of the financial sector gains traction. But we hardly receive reports. If you remember, the last time we met, it was in 2019, and we agreed that there is supposed to be a summit. The next thing, I get a letter written by Nedlac giving us excuses why that summit isn't taking place. It can't be that since 2020, there is an advent of technology. We have got virtual meetings, we have got virtual conferences. So their excuse, I don't understand it. They said they will bring a report to us in March, but it's unacceptable when entities of government are given responsibilities by parliament. They must take parliamentary decisions very serious. Otherwise, we are going to take steps against such entities. We haven't been elected here just to be, not to have teeth. Parliament does have teeth, and we must be taken very, very serious. So we agreed that after that meeting that we had in the old chamber, old assembly chamber, that the following is supposed to be done in regard to dealing with issues of financial sector. Because to that effect, there are resolutions that were taken in a conference or a summit that has been there before. But what we were supposed to do was to make follow-up that those resolutions were supposed to be implemented. Because we are worried. After 28 years, in a country dominated by Africans and blacks in general, there's no company which is 100% owned by black people in the JSE. What type of economy is that? We should be ashamed. If you go to China, it is the Chinese who are in the forefront of owning that economy. You go to India, the same applies. But you come to South Africa, it's like we are in Europe. It's unacceptable. The constituency that we represent, because we have been elected to be in these positions, we didn't go to interview, we were not appointed, we were elected through the ballot. Those who elected us through the ballot are not hip with the pace of economic transformation in the country in general and in the financial sector in particular. So you have to do something about this. Lastly, let me check, do you have a yardstick or a measurement instrument for youth? Because youth today are the hardest hit by the economy. Almost 74% of young people are unemployed. They go to NYDA and all over looking for money because they can get money from the very same banks, mainstream banks that we are talking about. And this is not proper. And we're talking about even graduates who have graduated, but they can't get jobs. And they look for economic opportunities, they can't get them. Do you have, as the commission, a measurement instrument as to, like you have with Black women, as to how this economy is trying to bring young people into the mainstream? And then let me take Umhlonishwa Skosana. Over to you, Umhlonishwa.
No, ngiyathokoza sihlalo hloniphekileko ngilotshisa namalunga wonke nama-representatives avela ku-commission ye-BBBEE and other officials in the platform from parliament and other institutions. Yeah, I think I must also indicate, Chair, that generally, I think we are worried. We are worried about the rate at which transformation is taking place in this country, especially in relation to the financial sector. I think we're quite worried that 28 years, almost 28 years into democracy, I think we are still confronted with the challenges that are confronting us today. I think we would have expected that at this point we would have a different a picture. But two questions that I want to ask from the Commission. One, I think they've indicated that the complaints that they are receiving from the financial sector are quite less as compared to other sectors. So I just want to find out that in terms of their assessment, is it so because there are less challenges in the financial sector, or is it so because the financial sector is still predominantly a white sector, if I can put it like that? Maybe there are less complaints because Black people don't even attempt to go to that sector. So it's just still predominantly a white sector. Perhaps that's the reason they've got fewer complaints. Or are they getting fewer complaints because people in that particular sector are doing things by the book? You've got less issues of ranting, you've got less issues of not following regulations and legislations. What is their assessment in terms of that? If, for instance, because a financial sector, I think it is a key sector in our economy. But now, if you've got fewer complaints that have to do with issues of transformation, what is your assessment when you sit down as a commission and look at it? Does it mean you've got lesser challenges, or is just that Black people, they decided to stay away from the sector? So it's just white people, predominantly white people, so they do as they wish. That's the reason perhaps you've got a lesser complaint. That is number one. The second question, which just is an emphasis on what Honorable Abrams has asked, because I think as Parliament, we should also be able to assist you if there are gaps in the legislation. Because from the presentation, I think it would appear that I think you are unable to do other things because the legislation does not give you enough powers. So in some of the things you would see them, but there's nothing that you can do because the legislation does not give you enough powers. Perhaps can you pinpoint gaps in the legislation, in the Act, to say there are gaps in the Act that we wish that the Parliament can look at so that it can be able to assist the Commission to have more teeth to bite in order to assist us in dealing with the issues of transformation. Because obviously, if the legislation is having gaps, obviously we won't be able to do other things, and we will in turn come back and complain and say we are not doing what we are supposed to do, but finding that the legislation itself is having gaps. So can you perhaps pinpoint the gaps, if there are any, in the legislation that would like us, perhaps as Parliament, to assist, I think, in filling them so that you've got more teeth to bite? Thanks, Chair.
Siyathokoza Mhlonishwa. Honorable Mabiletsa, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. We welcome the presentation. I just want to continue a comment to where the Chair has already said about report. In your own submission, you said the council did not submit reports. The last report that you had from the council is 2017-18. 2019, no report. 2020, no report. You know, now I'm sitting here and just wondering, but how are you going to plan forward if you do not have reports? And what did you do after not receiving this report? Because you're not saying that the slide that you were presenting, you just said there were no reports, there were no reports, there were no reports, and then maybe you will wait, the reports will come. And you are not telling us for what is it that you have done just to make sure that the reports are there, and how are you really going to plan forward if the reports are not there? Because no report simply means no work done. So I'm just a little bit confused there. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Is that all members? I see there are no hands, no more hands left. Can we have some responses? Ms. Nduli? Zodwa.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let me ask Ntate Maputa Jacob to just respond to the areas that relate to the DTIC. That will include the financial sector council reports to the minister, and we will then take it from there.
Thank you, Commissioner. There was a question on the Black Industrialist program. And yes, I just want to indicate that the program is continuing. As members will recall, it was launched about 5 or 6 years ago. Last year marked the 5th year of the program, and we did take stock of what was the achievement or the achievements of the past 5 years. And the report is also available on the DTIC website. It was in fact launched by our minister. So for the past 5 years or so, there have been some 32 billion investment by the DTIC, and also you know, in collaboration or leveraging from the private sector money to find you know, 800 or so Black industrialists and Black entrepreneurs. So that has been the achievement, and also about 120,000 job opportunities that were created. So those are, I mean, those the achievements that we've been able to realize through the program, which was launched by the DTIC, and of which we take the lead as government to ensure that there is investment in the industrial sector, manufacturing sector, and that we galvanize you know, all of government, you know, institution to ensure that they invest in those Black industrialists or Black enterprises. Sectors mostly that have been benefited include sectors like your food production, clothing and textile, mineral, mining, metal machineries and equipment, transport, logistic, as well as infrastructure, the chemical products, healthcare, the green economy, which is a rapidly emerging economy, and other related sector, including the tourism. So that's been the achievement to date with regard to the Black industrialists. But as I said, a full comprehensive report, which we launched last year, is available, and we can make it available to the committee. Then, with regard to the council, yes, for the past 2 years, the council has not been able to report or to submit the reports. The requirement is that they need to, on an annual basis, or at least on a 12 months period, submit progress report on implementation of the charter and the achievements thereof, or on transformation, to the Minister of Finance and also to the Minister of the DTIC. So for the past 2 years, they haven't been able to do that, and the reason cited is that there was delays, among others, in companies submitting data, of which we have said to them, look, the implementation of the charter, it's something that, as the sector, all sector stakeholders, as well as entities, have committed to, even up to the Nedlac level, that as the charter, they will, as a sector, they will want to have a sector-specific transformation guideline. So that that issue was emphasized. But let me say that we've been able to to agree that this should not happen again. So we're expecting that before sending, we have written to them to that effect, that at least by end of June we should be able to get the outstanding reports, and that moving forward on an annual basis we should get those reports. The other reason has been the poor quality of the other previous reports, where they were not comprehensive enough, because the views that the report should not only just give numbers, but also they should be able to indicate the impact that the sector is having within the sector itself, but also what impact does the sector have in addressing the socio-economic development challenges of the country, and supporting other sectors. We know the financial services sector is the bloodline life of the economy. So yeah, that's where we are, honorable members, that we should be able to get those reports before the end of June, and we will make them available, and that moving forward there will be a periodic submission of the reports by council on an annual basis. I think those were the two questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just to let members and the commission know that the chairperson has been kicked out by the network challenges in his area. But I see also that Temakazi seems to have been kicked out as well. Ms. Ndulu, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was also kicked out for a while, so I had to connect with my phone. So I'm using the other device. I hope it's audible.
Yes, it is.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, The questions that have been raised mostly, touch on the issues around the consequences for non-compliance and consequences basically for lack of transformation. Chair, we want to echo the sentiments that the level of non-compliance is worrying. But what we have done as the Commission, recall that in 2016, when we started, we ran a significant push in terms of raising awareness around the compliance requirements. We actually wrote to almost all of the entities that we identified as the ones that should be reporting to the Commission. And we then advised them of the requirements. We offered them the opportunity to be assisted by us to compile the reports and make sure that also they develop the BBBEE plans that will help them to comply with the legislation. So those services are free from the side of the Commission, and we continue to offer those services. So we did then work on a compliance strategy where we were really encouraging and ensuring that we are assisting. So in that process, we also engaged, for instance, with the JSE in regards to making sure that we increase and improve the level of compliance from the JSE listed entities. And that engagement with the JSE resulted in the JSE itself making the BBBEE compliance part of the listing requirements, which means that on an annual basis, the very same JSE listed entities are required to report to the JSE through the SENS process and their compliance with the BBBEE Act, and especially in regards to their compliance reports that should be submitted on an annual basis. So that was a welcomed intervention on the side of the JSE to complement. And further, when we still saw that we still have, just only barely around 50% that were reporting, we then also engaged further with the JSE, and we issued the JSE, through the JSE, issued the letters that gave the entities a notification of their non-compliance, as well as the requirement for them to submit their reports. And in that engagement, we were very clear also that if that continues with the non-compliance, we will then be forced to invoke the provisions of the Act. And so in this regard, in this year, last year we gave them the last opportunity. We gave time up until December for them to submit the reports. And those that have not submitted the reports are actually, in this week, they are being issued with the notices for non-compliance. And we hope to then refer them for prosecution, especially because the non-submission of reports obstructs the Commission from performing its mandate. So basically they are rendering the mandate of the Commission in terms of Section 13 FG, in terms of doing what the country has actually mandated us to do. So we will be referring those for prosecution as well, for obstruction as well, in addition to their non-compliance in any event. So there are offenses that are created in the legislation for obstruction, and we hope that we can then take this forward and have them prosecuted for that. But also on our side, we are hoping that as we start now enforcing that, this will also increase the level of reports that should be coming through, because what we seek to achieve is for these reports to come through so that we can do our job. So if it was according to our wish, we would like to spend less time on enforcement, but more time on compliance, helping entities to comply, because it is only through the compliance that we will be able to achieve the objectives of the Act. So yes, where now we are seeing that there's blatant disregard, I think we are unfortunately compelled now to up the enforcement strategy and be able to call people to account on this. But in addition to that, Chairperson, we also, in regards to the non-compliance by the organs of state, we have written letters to Parliament to also intervene in ensuring that the organs of state, when they account to Parliament in the various committees, that they also account on their compliance with the BBBEE legislation. But over and above that, we engaged with the Auditor General, and our engagement also resulted in ensuring that the AG includes as part of its audit the BBBEE compliance. We have seen also now recently a number of entities approaching the Commission wanting to understand how they should be reporting, because they have not been reporting. But because now the AG is also raising those issues with them in their audits, only then they beginning to take it serious, just because it will be in the audit, in their financial statements and the annual report that they have not been compliant. So we think that in terms of the consequences for organs of state and public entities not complying, there is little consequences in the legislation, because it does not even give any penalties for non-compliance. So we are also in the same way processing notices for non-compliance to all of the organs of state and the public entities that have been reminded several times through the commission letters, as well as through the public announcements that we have made, reminding entities to report on the annual basis, and they failed to do that. So we're also processing those notices for them as well, to be able to account, and we'll be submitting our full report to Parliament, our portfolio committee, in regards to that, so that the matter can be taken further in terms of ensuring that we are achieving the level of compliance that should be achieved. Ideally, we need to be able to have all of the entities that ought to report reporting, because then we will be able to get a sense of exactly how we look like as a country. But even without that information, when you look at the reports that we've assessed, you will see that the trend is consistent. We're moving at a snail pace, but then the effects of non-transformation of the inequality in this country, they perpetuate the poverty levels, they perpetuate the levels of unemployment. So the need to accelerate, unfortunately, cannot wait for this the bin counting exercise, where we see pockets and pockets of initiatives, but those that are not making the overall impact. And for the overall impact to be made is for the entities to have a consequence when they are not pushing on their targets. And that consequence should also be with the implementation of the cancellation of the contracts, the cancellation of the licenses for those entities that are not transforming, that there should be a consequence in the pocket, but also in their ability to be able to continue operating and making profits to the detriment of the economy. Chair, in terms of the BBBEE legislation, the lever for compliance is placed on government. That in terms of government should always ensure that the BBBEE requirements are met in respect of any procurement process, in respect of any public-private partnership that they enter into, in terms of any grant or incentive that is given to any entity in the economy, as well as some of the transactions that relate to the sale of the state assets. So when we see the transactions that are being announced around the sale of state assets, we should make sure that the BBBEE requirements are embedded in the criteria that is used to be able to source either a partner for a state-owned entity or any other acquirer of the state-owned entities. It must always be compliant with the BBBEE legislation. What we have picked up is that there are certain transactions that took place which did not take into account the BBBEE legislation, and as such, they are non-compliant. So we have already alluded to the relief fund for COVID, which did not have embedded in it the requirements to ensure that the BBBEE requirements are embedded there to ensure that Black entrepreneurs and businesses that are applying would then be given preference because they're Black. And we also noted the High Court decision against the Minister of Tourism in regards to the COVID relief fund, which set a BBBEE criteria, which by law, in terms of the BBBEE Act, it must be set, and it must be that in terms of the incentives of government, whether in the nature of the incentive, whatever the nature it is, for as long as it's an economic incentive, it must take into account the BBBEE criteria so that Black people will receive preference within that particular scheme. We are aware that the Minister of Tourism is appealing that particular decision, and we hope that the outcome of that appeal will set the tone for what exactly needs to happen in respect of the government authorizations in terms of licenses, incentives, and all of that. Chair, if we are not going to be able to disincentivize the entities that either engage in fronting and so forth, we will not be able to achieve what is required. The question that Honorable Abrams asked is in regards to what happened to the case, for instance, with the ESCOM when Tegeta had submitted such false certificates. That case, we made findings and we made recommendations for the termination of the contract that was awarded to Tegeta, and that contract has since been terminated. And also in terms of the other contracts that ESCOM has, we also requested the audit of all of the other contracts that they have. And then we also requested the referral of all of the other violations to the SIU. So a bulk of the contracts that were identified during that process have been provided to the SIU, and through ESCOM, they will then be assisting with the investigations on that as soon as, I remember that they were busy with the proclamation to be recommended to the president for that. And I do know that there is a proclamation that has been granted already in regards to some of the ESCOM contracts. But Chair, the Act also allows us to refer the matters to the SAPS and the NPA for prosecution. We have since referred a number of matters, but of the 30 matters that we recorded for referral, we have not seen a breakthrough yet. And we are hoping that the relevant criminal law enforcement agencies are still considering those matters, and that soon we'll begin to see some of the prosecutions that can take place, especially around those fronting schemes that have also demonstrated blatant criminality, because we've seen the manipulation of financial statements. We've seen the transfer of profits from the SA entity or from the SA economy into the external entities, which is not necessarily in line with the governance principles that should be adhered to by the companies in terms of the Companies Act. So we're hoping to see prosecutions in regards to that. So if we're to summarize the consequences for non-compliance, the consequences of the non-compliance, they are criminal in nature, is the referral to the SAPS and the NPA for prosecution, but also the entities of government are entitled to cancel contracts for entities that have misrepresented their status, especially those that presented statuses that are based on fronting schemes. Those contracts should be cancelled. Those licenses should actually be able to be withdrawn. In the recent case that we had with the Nigerian national that was claiming to be 100% Black owned, we also recommended the withdrawal of the CIDB grading that was awarded to that company on the basis of the false BBBEE status. So we believe that the authorizations that can be taken away from these businesses will also serve as a disincentive, you know, in terms of them entering into schemes that are not correct. Chair, I just want to also respond to the issue around the 909 complaints in terms of the successes. In the 909 complaints that we had handled for that period, we had success in 79% of the cases. So what it meant is that we have issued findings to entities in 423 cases, and those findings included remedial recommendations. The majority of the entities that we've issued findings to and have remedial recommendations, they have complied with those remedial recommendations. We've got about, I think it's less than 10 cases of the entities that have decided that they will take the Commission's decision on review. And so we are defending those cases, but our success rate, we believe that is good. The only downside, Chair, that I must also indicate, which is one area which we've identified as an area that Parliament, when it considers the amendment, it must consider to amend this. In the BBBEE Act, there's a provision that limits the Commission from publicizing its findings. And this happens when we issue our findings and when the entity then just gives an indication to the Commission that we are going to review your decision. They will sit for the entire period without going to court. During that period, we are not able to publish because the legislation says when somebody is going to be reviewing us, then we must wait and not publish.
This basically cripples us as a regulator, because our role is to ensure that on the cases that we've investigated where we've got negative findings, we should be able to publicize those so that the entities do not continue to run fronting schemes undercover, and that even when the regulator has actually found that they are not doing the right thing, that people do not know about it. It is not proper that we are operating like that. So this is one critical area that we require Parliament to really consider, because none of the other regulators that we know have a limitation of that nature. Because if you're a regulator, your successes do not only come from the criminal prosecutions, they come from raising awareness based on the decisions that you make, that you publicize those decisions to also deter other entities from engaging in similar practices. So we do note the successes that we have recorded so far, and we do have a number of cases that have not been published purely because of that limitation. And some of them, they will be, like, as I say, only about 10 cases, if not less, have been taken on review, and we're still defending those cases. So we're hoping that the restriction can be removed going forward. And the other aspect, Chair, that was raised is in regarding to how do we test genuine Black ownership from fronting. When the legislation was amended in 2013, Parliament made it clear that the definition of fronting is going to be all-encompassing. So the definition of fronting basically means that anything that happens, like any transaction, initiative that is entered into, or an arrangement that is entered into, which is a BEE initiative, if it goes against the objectives of the Act, or it undermines the implementation of any of its provisions, that will be fronting. So when we do investigations, we find fronting in respect of all of the elements of the BBBEE Act. But mainly we find fronting in the ownership element. That is because in the ownership element, that is where you find that the Black people are made 51% Black shareholders, but they do not have the powers and the rights to control those businesses. When the minority shareholders are actually the ones that are controlling the business, but the Black shareholding is only put on paper for the entity to be able to access opportunities in government. So now the codes do give us a guidance in terms of how do we test ownership. So when we test ownership, we test the exact shareholding that is being held and allocated to a Black person. We test whether the Black person indeed exists, and that person must be alive. So if the ownership is held through a particular structure, whether the structure is a company, a co-op, or a trust, or even a closed corporation, we are required to pierce through that structure until we find the Black person that is said to give the Black ownership to that particular entity. So we do test that, and the Act also defines who the Black person is. So when we find that the Black person behind the scheme does not meet the requirements, maybe is a foreign national, or is a person that was naturalized in South Africa, but only after 1994, and only then they became a citizen, those people do not qualify as Black people in terms of the Act. So when we find something like that, then that will be misrepresentation. And also when we look at the ownership, we also test what we call the voting rights. So what the Act, the codes require us to do is to make sure that when a person is 51% shareholder, they must control the votes in that particular company because they've got 50+1. And those must be evidenced in the shareholders' agreements as well as the dividend flow of the company. So we test all of those things. We check the agreements, and in some instances we find that even though the Black person has been allocated the majority of the shares, but you find that in terms of the voting rights, the minority has got the full the voting rights that actually surpass that of the majority Black shareholder. So you find that the majority Black shareholder is only a ceremonial person that is a shareholder only for the BBBEE compliance to be achieved. So in some of those cases, we've expressed our findings, and then we also have recommended remedies. In some of the cases, we've referred them to the SAPS and NPA for further consideration. Chair, the other aspect that we then consider in terms of the codes around ownership is to test the economic interest. The economic interest basically says that if a person is a shareholder, they must be entitled to the economic flows, the economic benefits in that company in the manner that is commensurate with the shareholding that they have. So if the company declares dividends, then it must follow as a consequence that the 51% Black shareholder will receive 51% of the dividends that have been declared. In the number of the transactions that we've assessed and analyzed, we've picked up that some of those dividend flows are restricted either in the financing agreement or in the shareholders agreement, where, for instance, the entity will then say that the dividends will only be declared once the Black shareholders have finalized paying the loan towards their shares. Now, when you look at that kind of a provision in the legislation, in the contract, what it means is that the Black people will not be getting any dividend flows, whether or not the company is making a profit. What that consequently means is that the Black people that are shareholders will never have money to repay that loan that they should be repaying. So instead of empowering, that structure actually undermines the ownership imperatives around the ownership element. That would be fronting. So it helps us we've got guidance in terms of the codes, but we also have guidance in terms of the evidence that we need to gather to confirm that there's Black ownership. Chair, I must say also that the challenge that we faced in regards to the transactions, and also which we picked up in the compliance reports that are submitted. Most of the entities that are unable to submit the reports for us, especially on the JSE, is because they are not able to give us the information and the breakdown and evidence that the Black people that they are claiming to be owning a stake in their entity do actually exist. So in those instances, they have told us that they are unable because they don't keep that information. So you can never say something is Black owned if you cannot show a Black person to which that Black ownership is coming from. So we have those challenges, but we have issued letters to those transactions that are non-compliant, and we have referred a number of them for investigations, and there will be consequences for that. But we still believe that the consequences under the BBBEE Act are not serious enough to deter people from engaging in these practices. The legislation is over-criminalized, and it relies purely on the criminal process to prosecute and sentence people. But we know that that process in a regulatory environment is not successful on its own. So in the regulatory environment, you need both the criminal process as well as the administrative process. The administrative process will ensure that there are prohibited practices where we say it is unacceptable, it is prohibited for you to do 1, 2, 3. When that happens, the commission can then have the power to issue non-compliance notices, and we can also be in a position to stop that process from happening while the investigation is taking place. At the moment, the legislation is a little bit weak when it comes to that. We have presented these issues to Parliament already in 2016, that at the opportunity that they get to amend the legislation, these are the first things that they need to attend to, because they actually derail the extent to which the BBBEE legislation can be effective, purely because there's no disincentive for and consequences for non-compliance. Chair, I'm trying to just see if there are other areas that I need to cover. But I think in terms of the addition, in terms of what we have also been doing, in terms of the reports, we have been following up with the various entities. We have also started doing site visits to also test whether the reports that are submitted to us are actually compliant. Because what we find in the site visits, sometimes when we go back and visit the entity and check all of these areas around compliance, management control, enterprise and supply development, you'll be surprised. In some instances, we find that where an entity has recorded certain points for enterprise and supply development, when we ask for the list of those Black entrepreneurs that they've supported, we are unable to get the list. So then the question would be, how did they get the points allocated if they don't even have a list of those entities? So the site visits help us to verify the reports that are also given to us. And we are seeing that if we increase the site visit with the capacity of the commission, we'll be able to achieve some successes in that regard to increase the level of compliance with the BBBEE Act. Chair, just in summary, in terms of the issues that the honorable member requested us to highlight in terms of the gaps in the legislation, as I've indicated, we did do an assessment when we started in 2016 to just identify some of the inherent limitations that we picked up from the legislation. Firstly, the legislation does not have any offense, or it does not penalize any entity from not transforming. So if an entity decides in South Africa that I'm not going to transform, there's nothing that can be done against that entity. So it doesn't criminalize or penalize non-compliance. However, what it does is that it says that entities that are doing any business or that are involved in economic activity with government, they must be BBBEE compliant. So meaning that any entity, for them to engage with government, they must be BBBEE compliant. So it is through that lever of government that the legislation is actually depending on. And then the second part of it is that then it criminalizes the things that when you start wanting to engage in the transformation agenda, the things that you should not be doing, like fronting, like misrepresentation. So it only creates offenses for those things, but not for you not meeting your targets. So we want that Parliament should consider whether that's strong enough, because then we believe that there must be a set, there must be set parameters in terms of what is it that will be acceptable compliance, especially considering where we are as a country and where we should be. Because at the moment, the targets are very, very flexible. A company that contributes only 10% towards BBBEE is considered to be compliant. It's a level 8. So meaning that if we are going to drive and accelerate transformation, it would not be proper for companies just to sit between level 5 and 8. We should move more companies towards the higher levels. That will then be a demonstration of the higher levels of ownership, skills development, and enterprise and supply development, which are priority elements. Chair, the second thing that we want to be considered is just to, in addition to the criminal provisions in the legislation, we would like Parliament to consider putting the administrative processes, which will have administrative penalties, where a tribunal that will look purely on fronting matters can be able to impose penalties to an entity sooner than waiting for a criminal process where a conviction beyond reasonable doubt has got to be obtained. So the administrative process will be in the same way that the competition authority structure is like, in the same way that the consumer protection structure is like, where the commission has investigated, the commission should be able to send a matter to a tribunal that is dedicated to fronting matters and have that tribunal consider whether the company is in violation or not. And that entity, that tribunal, will consider the administrative issues, not the criminal issues. The criminal issues will be sent to the criminal processes, but we don't have to wait for the criminal process to be concluded for penalties to be imposed. So we believe that the introduction of the administrative process will complement the criminal process, because all over the world, the jurisdictions that are successful are those jurisdictions that have made a combination of these particular systems to make sure that the regulatory framework becomes effective. And we need to also ensure that we strengthen the independence of the commission to be able to act without fear, favor, and prejudice, because at the moment, the commission is not an independent entity. It is not operating on its own. It doesn't have its own infrastructure. So it basically operates, but without the express mandate of that independence and the autonomy to run their operations without fear, favor, or prejudice. So that is an area that we also recommended. At the moment, also, the commission is not a listed public entity. So that also affects its operations in the sense that it doesn't have a budget allocated on its own. And so we hope that Parliament can also review that to ensure that the budget of the commission as a regulatory body is appropriated directly from Parliament, and that it will have certainty around its own budget, and so that it can plan for its operations and be able to intervene with speed. Chair, the last thing around the legislative amendments is just to strengthen the extent to which the principles in the codes are manipulated, to strengthen by making sure that there will be a list of things that if you do this, this will be null and void. So in the same way that we have done for consumer protection type contracts, to say, if you extend credit to a consumer and you've not done an affordability assessment, that agreement between you and the consumer will become null and void. So which means that you cannot even as a credit provider chase that debt because you actually extended the debt recklessly. So, you know, there are those do's and don'ts that should be obvious in the legislation, and the BBBEE Act doesn't do that. So it leaves a lot of things to interpretation. And so that is why in some instances we had debates around whether some schemes that do not show us Black people should be regarded as Black ownership. And it shouldn't be like that, because the law should be very clear that if this does not give me this, then it is prohibited. So I think the elevation of closing those loopholes that just expose the work to a lot of interpretation, and perhaps maybe the need to go to court from time to time would be minimized, and ensure that the legislation can be very straightforward and be able to give direction that will ensure that the enforcement is good. And to close the loopholes around some of the schemes and the principles that are there, like the modified flow-through principle, to tighten up some of these issues, to make sure that we do not allow schemes that look like Black ownership schemes but are not Black ownership schemes, because we're just shooting ourselves in the foot as a country, because we will not see the change in the ownership patterns. Chair, that is all that we can present for now, and hopefully we've addressed all of the questions. And as we have indicated as well, that there's no consequences for organs of state for not adhering to the Act. And so we also hope that Parliament will consider that and be able to have some consequences in the legislation so that they can be overseen and implemented by the Commission. Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity to respond.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Nduli. It was a mouthful, and I think one has to appreciate the amount of work that you do, as well as the passion with which you do it. And I think where transformation is concerned, each and every one of us should play our roles. You have significantly outlined the role of Parliament in closing gap in legislation. And I think it means that there is a lot that needs to happen. There is a lot of work that lies ahead for Parliament, and as well as for the relevant departments. I think in concluding our meeting, it has been a very enriching experience to interact with you. And I think Mr. Mapota did promise to make the report available to us, and I think that can be facilitated. And I think one needs to appreciate the fact that indeed, if BBBEE compliance is included in the audit opinion, then yes, we'll have better performance. Transformation is not a walk in the park, because what it means is that there are elements within our society that have to let go while receive. However, having said that, it also goes with a lot of responsibility. I'm happy, Ms. Nduli, that you also mentioned the issue of capacity within the Commission, because we would not be able to hear the good stories that are being told today if there was no capacity in the Commission. Honorable members, I am concluding the meeting now, and maybe just to really thank the commission and the team, and thank all the members who are in attendance, and thank I know that there were some hassles when the meeting started, and it took some time before we could really start the meeting. So I want to thank the parliamentary staff as well, who have made it possible for us to have this meeting. And if I may check with them whether there aren't any announcements for the committee. Tebuko or Alan, any announcement?
Thank you, it's Alan here. The only announcement is that the committee is meeting jointly with a select committee on finance tomorrow to receive a briefing from Parliament, finance and legal and supply chain team on regulations that's been issued for the committee or for the committees to look at. So that meeting is 2 o'clock tomorrow. My colleague from Select Finance and Kululeko sent out the link, so I'll send it on to our members immediately after this meeting with the agenda and presentation.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Once more, thank you to the Commission for the presentations, and the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.